Bonjour.
Hey, bonjour.
How are you,
I'm
Mathieu?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you, Anna?
I'm wonderful. And so, for those who don't know you, you are the glucose chef, and you have a really neat story, a food story, a culinary story, a travel story. Tell us a little bit about your background. We'd love to hear where you're from.
Of course, of course. So, as I'm sure everybody can notice, I'm French because I have a some accent. I try to do my best in English. If something is not very clear, just let me know. But I was born in the south of France, in Bordeaux, and I was raised in the vineyard of my parents. So really immersed into the wine culture and gastronomy culture. So it was really, I think, my passion for food and for culinary pleasures come from here. Although then after that, I was kind of nerdy, so I think I keep going into the scientific world. So I studied chemistry and follow my life into a very interesting and challenging corporate world that significantly affect my health, I think. I would say, which turned me, I mean, like a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, obliged me to look into my health and understanding what was going on with my body and what the way I was feeling and the way I would say, uh, the way that the world was affecting my body. So I really turned into, I would say, a cornerstone in my life and start looking a little bit more inside more than outside. So I move out of my corporate world and start the Glucose Chef, leveraging my scientific background, but also my passion for food.
Well, that's a
Because I'm
wonderful way to marry your passions, and who doesn't love to enjoy that on the palate? However, you are not located in France anymore. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up in South America.
Oh yes, of course, yeah. I mean, if I'm currently living in Chile, although now I'm in Brazil. I have the chance to be in Brazil, but you see a little bit the environment. I won't turn the camera because it's very, very bright outside, so you won't see it. but but it's very warm and indeed, during my corporate career, I travel a lot, the world. I discover South America. I had the chance to live in Mexico, Chile, Argentina, and I finally settled down in Chile, where I'm currently living, which was also a very, very interesting, I would say, culinary experience, because although in France we have a deep and rich culinary culture, it's also a country where we receive lots of influence from different culture and part of the world. So it was very interesting for me as a culinary experience to experience how do we eat in Mexico and how do we eat in Argentina, and bring all that together, and I try to promote the French lifestyle and the culinary, I would say, experience of the French. However, if people are following me and look at my recipes, you can always see that there is some tweaks from different influence of where I've lived, or where I've been passionate about discovering the way that people is eating all around the world, because we all have very interesting way of feeding ourselves.
J'adore ese melange. Me encanta esta mezcla porque no somos solamente una cosa. Somos muchas cosas. And so we're so many different things, and I love diversity. So tell us a little bit. So, what is this French way of eating? I mean, in my imagination, I'm thinking like cheese and baguettes and wine. Is that what it is?
Yes, I mean, there is one interesting aspect around the French culinary culture that turned to create the what we call the French paradox. So the French paradox is, if you look about what people in France are eating, and the way that people are living, you see that the French have generally low obesity rate, nearly half of the US, and low diabetes rates. So, and it's less than half of the US. So France has only 5% of diabetes versus 11% of diagnostic diabetes in the US, although it's growing in the US and it's pretty stable in France. So with my scientific background, I start digging into that French paradox, and try to understand why is that? Why is that the French eating rich, tasty, fatty, lots of fat from animal sources in our plates, and say, how can they even possible? So, and with my scientific background, look into that, figure out that that's not really a paradox. When you look about what the French are eating, we're eating something, I mean, we're eating food that keep our blood sugar much more stable than, I would say, the average American diet. So that explains why we have less metabolic disease, and we have less glucose spikes, and then less issue with our health related to nutrition.
Well, so do you think I'm sorry, were you saying is it just you're consuming less sugar, or the foods aren't as processed, or there's not glyphosate all over your wheat? Like what sort of factors are you attributing the ability to eat what we consider sort of a rich diet and yet still not have these same issues that Americans struggle with?
Yeah, in my analysis, and generally say that there is like 4 main reasons. First, I would say that French traditional, because obviously if you look about the French culture today, you see higher penetration of processed food, and there is junk food in France too. No discussion around that. But if you look about traditional way of eating in France, you will see that the French are focused on natural food more than processed food. Obviously, you can go to supermarket and find something to affect your health without any issues. But if you look about the way that the French traditionally eat, you will see raw ingredients. Lots of food come from the market and not the supermarket. So there is a much closer relationship between our plates and nature.
Which j'adore cette chose. Quand j'ai habité au Aurillac, tous les jours, nous marchons au marché, première au boulanger, enfin la boucherie. So cada día tuvimos que caminarnos para comprar todas las cosas que vamos a comer en este día. Y me encanta esta fresca, manera de vida que es muy diferente que aquí en los Estados Unidos, donde siempre estamos en los mercados grandes y muchas veces es algo especial irnos al farmer's market. So the farmer's market tends to become like this special treat as opposed to how we typically live our lives. And we tend to go to these huge supermarkets where the produce has been picked ages ago and it's been preserved and sprayed so that by the time it reaches you, it still hasn't spoiled. And yet that, of course, has an impact on how we consume those foods, even if we think we're choosing fresh things.
Exactly. And that first reason, I mean, more natural food, I mean, explain many different aspects between the metabolic situation of the French versus maybe other cultures or other countries, because indeed less processed, it's less things that have been aggregated or artificial processes that have been run onto the natural ingredients. So you bring into your body much less chemicals. You also eat more in season, because if you go to the markets instead of supermarket, you eat in season, so you get more nutritional, higher nutritional content in the food that you're eating. And I mean, it's no brainer, I would say. And the second reason I was going to say is also, if you look about the French diet, it's high in fat, protein, and fibers. So, and those 3 things are the thing that we need, our metabolism need to keep our blood sugar stable. Obviously, if you go for high carb, very highly processed carbs, that's going to spike your glucose and build up day after day. If you eat that every day, build up into some kind of metabolic disease, which when you look at what the French eat generally is meats, vegetables, dairies, fat. I mean, and there is a very high content of fat, in the French dishes. And I was looking at stat around what the French eat, and generally in France, around 40% of the calorie that we eat come from fat.
Well, and here, this is the lie in the United States, right? We've since learned that scientists were paid off in order to lie so that the sugar industry could claim that it was fat that makes you fat. if we just apply a little bit of logic, what do we put in the oil lamp? It's fat, right? So fat is fuel. Fat is energy for us to burn, and we need to replenish it because we burn through it so cleanly. Whereas carbs, yes, they're also energy, but they tend to stick to our bodies, or like you're talking about glucose, chef, right? So let's dive in a little bit more onto the glucose piece. What does this have to do? Why is it that getting your calories from carbs, which is also a form of energy, why does that create such a negative impact in the body?
Excellent question. So the big issue that we have is in fact to fuel our body. We have different options, and our body can function with different source of energy. We can function with carbs, or we can function with fat, and our body can process both. But and I would say naturally, if you look about centuries ago, what were we eating? We were eating animals that we were hunting and plants that we were gathering. And the carbs, I mean, the way that we know the carbs today were not available centuries ago. So we were functioning, our body were used to function with the protein intake and the fat intake more than the carb intake. And we had carbs in our diet, but more seasonally. Obviously, when it was harvesting season, you get all the fruit, and then we were loading into carbs. And our body, what do our body do with carbs? You take those carbs, breaking down into glucose, raise our blood sugar in our body, and automatically our body responds to those spikes to store that energy, because basically glucose in our vein is energy for our muscles. But if we're not performing some kind of physical activity at that moment, what our body gonna do is store that energy for later. And that's the whole problem that we have today. If we have a high carbs diet, our body that are trained to survive and thrive in difficult environment are storing all that energy for later. The thing is, we never use it. So moving back to what the French are eating, we are eating much more fat, which not creating those glucose spike in our body, and so we avoid storing all that energy and not building up into metabolic disease over time. So that's the whole thing behind the glucose chef, when we teach people to bring back a little bit to a more natural, or I would say traditional way of eating, instead of going into that vein of super mega processed diets that basically are killing ourselves.
They are killing ourselves. I mean, I think we can see the stats here in the United States just in the amount of disease, the types of disease, and, you know, for all of the sort of modern technologies and whatnot available to us and the research available, we don't seem to be able to solve this puzzle. And I think the real problem is we're constantly subsidizing crops that have a net negative effect. If they have to put a gene into a crop that kills bugs, what do you think it's going to do to you? Like, you have bugs inside your body, you know, your healthy bacteria, your microbes. And so, and I would also say it's the ultra processing, right? So at the harvest time, you also had pieces of the wheat that had more protein, that had more fat in it, that had fiber in it. And, you know, I think fiber is one of the most challenging things. We have all this ultra processed sugars, but our body isn't required to break down the fibers of plants, the fibers of vegetables, the fibers that really are the substrate. They're the prebiotics for the bacteria that live in our body. And so it's great that we can make all these fermented foods and drinks at home, and we need them, of course, but what we need to do is also feed those microbes a healthy diet before we're relying on these really cheap inputs.
And one thing that is very interesting is, I mean, when we talk about carbs or protein and fat, you can easily fall into excesses, because I was saying, indeed, you eat carbs and it raises your blood sugar, and then the insulin reaction and fat storage and building up into metabolic disease. But naturally, we also eat carbs. The thing is, if you eat carbs outside the natural cycle of carbs, I mean, because when you look about fruit, which have a high content of fructose, it's a big amount of carbs. So, and I eat an apple, for example, and especially GMO apple. But anyway, I mean, when you eat a fruit, that's going to create a carb intake, but it also come with the fibers and prebiotic and probiotic inside the fruit that your body needs to process it. And so if you take that fruit and put it into an ultra processed product, then it doesn't have all the different components that your body needs to really process appropriately that carb. And that's the big issue. So, and that's the whole thing behind the Glucose Chef. And we bring back people, say, okay, that doesn't, I mean, we're not saying that the smoothie that you're drinking is bad, but look at it. Look at what you're eating and try to move back to something which is a little bit more natural, because getting more natural ingredients, then you have a much more something which is much more easily processed by your body and won't harm yourself.
Well, and then also think about, like, you need your teeth. And if you don't use them because you're always sucking things through a straw, at some point that's going to have a negative impact on your teeth, right? So there's all these unintended consequences that come from, you know, buying into this life of convenience, right? We're so busy and we don't have time. And somehow cooking, the most important thing, food, nourishing ourselves, has become the least important thing, the thing that we want to spend no money on, the thing that we want to spend no time on. And yet it's one of the literally most vital things we can do for ourselves.
And it turns to be very expensive, because when you look about the, I mean, economy behind cooking your meals from real ingredients, then you see all the saving that you're doing, because as the food is, I mean, the food is what we put in our body. So it's feed ourselves, our muscle, but also feed our mind. So there is a whole, I mean, we'll say impact when we feed ourselves with junk food. So then we have consequences that are very, very costly, and will need lots of time and lots of energy and money to be solved. And that's where generally at the Glucose Chef we say, you better spend 15 minutes, because it's only what you need to create something to eat, 15 minutes to prepare a dish and having it the right way to feed yourself appropriately, rather than then trying to solve your pre-diabetes, diabetes, or even worse.
Exactly. It's worth the investment. You're worth the investment. You're worth the time. And think about kids too. Like when we start them on these diets of, you know, highly processed foods and sugar, and we wonder, why is their behavior so bad? Why are they so difficult to deal with? Why do they have so many challenges? And we see that we're creating an environment that doesn't lead to positive outcomes for anybody in that equation. It might feel convenient to just pour a snack out of a bag for a child, but if that isn't a snack of, you know, some dried fruit or whatever that might be, that's a little bit of a healthier alternative to some sort of processed, you know, O-shaped, dinosaur shaped, whatever shaped toy, right? As opposed to actual nutrition. I mean, this creates a whole lifetime of problems. So how do we unwind all that? How do we get back to cooking real foods, especially if you're someone who is afraid, if you're someone who's been, you know, working with a microwave for a really long time, or, you know, consuming processed foods that are really convenient to make? Where do you start?
So it can be overwhelming, and I get it from lots of people that come to the Glucose Chef and we start helping. It can be overwhelming. We say, where should I source? How do I cook? So, and when you start digging into it, it's not that complicated. But yes, there is some different aspect that you have to take care progressively. And sometimes the big make is, okay, I want to change completely my lifestyle and I want to change everything. And that's very, very overwhelming, and people generally quit very quickly. So what we try to do is, okay, take it easy. We were going to go step by step. First, we're going to solve what you're buying. Looking at what exactly, where you source your stuff and your groceries, and try to move a little bit healthier and more connected to the crops, more connected to the nature. And that's one of the steps that we try to incentivize people on. understand what you're buying and what you are eating first. And then once you have a little bit more healthier ingredients, try to prepare your stuff. And that's what the Glucose Chef, we teach lots of people to cook very easy, and I would say easy and delicious. I always sound a little bit commercial, but that's not the idea. But when you start cooking, you figure out that it's not that complicated to create very, very simple but delicious dishes. And when you do that shift, you figure out that eating, I mean, delicious food that you prepare yourself also feed your mind, and then feed your absence of cravings, your absence of anger. So then you don't necessarily need snack at the middle of the afternoon or at mid-morning. And then you see that everything starts settling to more healthier, I would say, healthier life and healthier relationship with nutrition. And there was one thing I was willing to mention on when you mentioned your French experience, which is very, very important also in French lifestyle, and we tend to forget, especially in our world of convenience, is walking. Because if there is one thing that people in France are doing, is walking, because we walk to the market, we walk over there, and we tend to forget the power that is behind simply walking. Walking 10 minutes is an amazing workout for our body. And so I used to wear a continuous glucose monitor to monitor the way that my body is responding to the food I'm eating. And obviously I was eating, I don't know, oatmeal and spike. But oatmeal plus 20 minutes walking, I was not spiking. Only 20 minutes walking. I'm not running, not working out at the gym, just walking. And so when you combine eating healthier, simple stuff, not very complicated, with the power of walking, or taking more the stairs, or leaving the car a little bit and try to walk, even if it's in the going to the supermarket, doesn't matter. It makes a huge impact in our metabolism, huge impact.
Well, and I think what you're saying is just that you got to understand what it is you're putting in your body, how it's going to cause your body to respond, and then match that food to the moment, right? Like oatmeal can seem convenient because here I'm just, some hot water and I'm mixing it up, or it's a little time on the stove. It doesn't take very long. But if you're then immediately going and sitting in front of a desk, oatmeal is probably not the best thing for you to have in that moment, right?
Yeah,
and so combining your knowledge and your information around, how glucose works in the body with these sort of traditional lifestyle choices of the French, it sounds like you've got a really great marriage here. So how do people find out about the Glucose Chef? Where do we find you?
So the main platform where we are publishing our content is Instagram. So just follow the link on the Glucose Chef and you will find me, and all the content and resources that, we created different resources, free ebook, free masterclass, and we also issue a ebook on the French lifestyle, or what is exactly in the French lifestyle that people do in France that can be replicated somewhere else in the world, that make the whole difference in terms of metabolism, health, weight, all that. So all that is in Instagram, and there you can contact me by DM or by email. No worries. We are available and disponible for every single questions. And I would say that as it's a pretty, I would say, using the glucose as an indicator for healthy living, it's pretty new, and people have lots of questions. They say, why are you wearing a CGM if you're not diabetic, or a continuous glucose monitor if you're not diabetic? And how do you, and so we receive lots of questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I generally answer lots of questions by DM as why you do that, and why they do that, and how does it work, and why the French do that, and so happy to answer any questions. They're very easy to go through DMs, and I answer everything.
Well, that's great, because what you're doing is you're marrying technology to create information that then allows you to make a more sensible choice. And I think we see other wearables and devices becoming more popular. For example, some Oura Ring where you want to track your sleep and am I getting the deep enough sleep, because sleep is so vital. I just think that we're at a really lovely point in time. While yes, there's a lot of awful food out there that's, being pushed and marketed towards people and is creating this awful pandemic of ill health in across the world. We're also at a point where we have so much information and technology that we can really dial in and get very granular and specific about how different foods impact your individual body, because not all bodies respond the same. And I think that that's so important for us to remember. And our motto here at Kombucha Camp is trust your gut, which means listening to your body and how what you're putting in your body or anything you're absorbing makes you feel. Because yes, you can get that sugar hit and think, ooh, this is great and my body wanted this. But then if you have a headache later, exactly, or a crash, same with a coffee, right? Oh, this coffee is going to give me this boost. And then, 20 minutes later, you're back to feeling even less energy than before. And so we start to be able to make choices, not just based on an immediate pleasure, but how does this then impact our bodies? And I think that's so important. And one of the really great things specific about glucose and kombucha is kombucha really helps to support a healthy liver. And so a lot of folks, and now keep in mind, we do need to make it when it's more on that sour side, so more of those organic acids are present. And when we do that, that really helps to support a healthy liver. It helps us to process any sort of sugars we're taking in, and it can really have a net positive effect on keeping those spikes from happening and allowing your body to use that energy naturally so that you don't hang on to it. So it really is a wonderful tool, especially when we're consuming a diet that isn't fully supportive. I mean, the reality is no one is escaping the poisoning, right? They're spraying stuff on us in the air. There's stuff in the water. There's stuff in the food. There's pesticides. There's PFAS. I mean, like the list of chemicals and toxins that our bodies are subjected to continues to grow. And that's not to cause people to feel depressed, but it is to give some context for why you might think, well, I've been eating this way for so long and I've been fine, except now you're not. And so finding a different way, changing things up, going back to those traditional ways really is a valuable pathway for people to come back into alignment with their bodies and really listen to them.
And I would say that, it's very important what you were saying around, we're not living into laboratory. So although we want to eat a certain way or we want to live a certain way, we receive influence from very different aspects. So it's not that we are isolated. So in a sense that, we at the Glucose Chef, we teach a certain way which is linked to the way that we were eating maybe traditionally, which is more natural and which have some very good health benefits. But also one thing that I learned from my French, I would say, background, it's also don't freak out. Don't stress too much around stuff, because if there is one thing that is very, very toxic and maybe more than lots of influence, external influence, is stress. Stress can affect completely and drastically your metabolism and your glucose response and your glucose spike. So for example, the oatmeal I was mentioning, if I eat oatmeal stressed without a good night of sleep, the spike will be much bigger than if I'm having oatmeal, in a more rested moments, peacefully, not stressed. So it's very important to also rebalance a little bit stuff and say, okay, we're here to enjoy life first. Let's do it healthier, but don't be crazy about it, because if not, you're gonna affect yourself.
No, you're absolutely correct. Stress is the killer. And so stress, as you mentioned, can come in so many formats, whether that's not getting enough sleep, whether it's not getting your nutrients, it can just be anxiety or trauma. And this is where I think the beauty of living in this moment too is how open we've become about discussing our trauma. And I think it's important for us to do that work. However, it's also a good reminder to not get caught up in those loops or in those stories, because they can then become this sort of badge of honor, instead of something that we're here to process, to digest, break into small pieces, and then release, right? So I have this whole theory from fermentation that, the excrement or the, whatever it is we're processing and releasing becomes the fertilizer for what's next, because we see that in nature, right? As bodies go back to the earth, those components are broken down by the microbes and they're reabsorbed. Or as the leaves fall from the tree, the dead leaves around the roots, those nutrients then become reabsorbed so that the tree can have fresh leaves in the spring. And so if we start to approach everything with this sort of mentality that we're here to process, to figure things out and find a new way forward, then it isn't so difficult, it isn't so challenging, it doesn't become so stressful and overwhelming to say, hey, let's take a page out of that French lifestyle. Let's have dinner for 2 hours and great conversation and feel relaxed and not, 10 minutes in front of the TV, right? And, how do we start to make those little shifts so that we come back into balance and we start to really respect that our bodies are a temple, and what we put in them and how we treat them is something that needs to be approached with a bit of the sacred, with a bit of real intention behind it, as opposed to sort of the thoughtlessness so that we can be on to the next entertainment.
Exactly. Or check the list. Yeah,
message.
Eat 500 calories inside and going for something else. And it's very important to acknowledge that the way there is what we are eating is important, but the way we eat is very important, and something that we extract from the French lifestyle to highlight a little bit, to say, look at the lifestyle of the French. Look, the more relaxed, or the way they enjoy the food instead of, piling the food into the mouth in front of the computer or the TV or whatever you're doing while you're eating, because that matters. It doesn't look so bad. It doesn't look very important, but it is very important, because your mind, when you are eating, your mind is processing what you're eating. If you're entertaining your mind in something else, so then your mind is not feeling or perceiving what you are eating. And so then what's happened? You're gonna overeat, because your brain is not saying stop, you have enough, because it didn't perceive the food that you eat. So it's and on the contrary, if you spend some times, maybe not 2 hours lunch every day. I understand that everybody has other activity also, but if you take some time to be thankful for the food that you are having in your plate, and you enjoy the food, and you perceive the taste of the food and the different flavors, texture, and the way that your brain is perceiving the food. And I really want to ask the people who are listening to that episode to make the experiment. Same plate of food that you generally eat in front of the TV, the computer, or looking at or scrolling at the phone. Turn off the electronic, same plate of food, and eat slowly. Put your fork down between the bites, and you will see. You shouldn't be able to eat the whole plate, because satiation will be kicked by the brain much earlier than if you're entertaining your brain for something else. Really do it. You will see the difference.
Wow, that's a really powerful practice that you just shared, because it's absolutely true. And as you know, I have an old trauma pattern of eat as quickly as possible because there might not be enough. And yet I've been in a situation where I have plenty of food available to me, therefore I don't need to continue that pattern, and yet it still sometimes persists. And so consciously putting my fork down and making sure I'm breathing as I eat, but even to your point of giving thanks. And so this doesn't have to be necessarily associated with a specific religion, but just the idea of being grateful for all the people who made your food possible, from, you know, the farmers in the field to the people processing it in whatever plant, to how they're making it and putting it in the packages, to the people delivering it to the store, to the people working at the store, to you, right? Like all these different steps if you buy at a market. Now at a farmer's market, same thing though. You still have people who are planting, cultivating, picking, you know, bringing everything to you so you can take it home. There's just there's a couple fewer steps. And so the more intentionality we can put into that act of eating and nourishing ourselves and really being conscious to what it is we're doing, I think is a huge part of this sort of French lifestyle that you're talking about, that, you know, that many cultures have, but we certainly think of the French lifestyles having that love of gastronomy, that love of taking their time and really savoring those delicious pleasures.
Definitely. I mean, obviously, it's very iconic for the French. It doesn't exist only in France, definitely. However, it's iconic, so it's very easy for people to see the image, say, "Oh, the French is like that. Maybe I should try." However, I mean, being thankful, taking the time. I think also it's really related to the full connection of our attention, because when we are eating, obviously, it's all the senses, but it's also our digestive system, our gut. We know that, and we discussed in our last live, the connection between our brain and our gut, and that really interrelate and communicate. Maybe we're not, I mean, completely aware of the way it's working, but definitely if you take time to enjoy your meal, it makes complete difference.
Absolutely. Well, this has been such a lovely conversation with Mathieu, and I hope that some folks out there are gleaning some nuggets or at least some reminders that are going to be really helpful to them. And you have so generously offered to share a copy of your new ebook. And so we are going to host a giveaway. We'll be sharing more details about that tomorrow. But any sort of last words or anything else you'd like to share with everybody before we go today?
Well, instead, I mean, on top of trying that experiment, I explained to eat slowly the same plate that you're generally eating, doing something else. I mean, one thing that also would be very interesting for people that are listening to that episode to experiment is something that will create an instant impact in their day. Instead of going for oatmeal or for a high carb breakfast, which generally we tend to do that, everybody tend to do that because it's very convenient. We go and take the bread and oatmeal or bagel or whatever. But instead of doing that, if you can, skip breakfast, have coffee. If you cannot, because maybe it's too hard to wait until lunch, so then have a savory breakfast. Some eggs with some non-starchy veggies, but try to limit down the carb on your breakfast and feel how you feel. I mean, pay attention how you feel during this morning. Do you feel the need to eat at mid-morning because you have some cravings or hunger, or not? You will see the difference is completely amazing, because when you start your day with a high carbs, it's skyrocket your blood sugar since the morning. You're very sensitive in the morning to carbs. So then you have a deep glucose crash if your body, I mean, if you're healthy and you don't have insulin resistance issue. And you feel that energy crash and the need to eat something at the middle of the morning, but not because you're hungry. It's because of your glucose regulation. So try a savory breakfast and you will see it's completely change your day.
I'm a huge fan. I love eggs in the morning, and sometimes there's toast. Sometimes it's like you're talking about. I love to saute mushrooms, or maybe lately I have some beet greens because I picked up beets at the farmer's market. I'm going to make beet kvass because that's what's in season.
Oh, that's good.
And this is what I love about going to the market, is you find different things you can incorporate. You know, the winter squashes are out here. There's so many different things that you can enliven, and then your breakfast is more interesting anyways. But you're absolutely right. Especially here in the US, it's like sugar, 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 sugar. If it's cereal, if it's donuts, if it's pastries, right? Like there's just so much sweets first thing in the morning. It's really not. It really can't be good for you, and we can see it isn't.
Yeah, and it really takes one day to experiment, to try, and to be convinced, because the difference is incredible. Is incredible in energy, how you feel, how your mind is clearer. It's really, really impressive. So really, really incentivate people that are listening to that show to try that.
Absolutely. And anyone can feel free to drop any tips or their favorite food nuggets here for us to all learn from. But I agree with you. I think paying attention, and then to your point about skipping breakfast, and look, the advice has shifted so much. In a way, it's really confusing. And sometimes I think that might be on purpose. But it's also because bodies are different and they need different things. And so I think listening to your body,
Yeah.
and this is where we always tell people, a glass of kombucha first thing in the morning, or your water kefir or your milk kefir, whatever your ferment is, first thing in the morning, that's going to help with your digestion. It's going to help to get the system moving, right? We want to make sure everything's moving in the morning after we've had a nice long rest. And so, and then start to add in your nutrients and other things at that point. But getting hydrated first thing in the morning is super crucial.
Definitely. And that's one thing that I was willing to reinforce a little bit earlier, but then I forgot, is you were mentioning that every metabolism is different. So, and our gut health is different. And it's really impressive when you start looking at glucose management and the way that people react to food, that we are all different, and there is no magical recipe that fit for everybody. So it's really important to also learn to listen to our bodies. Sometimes we forgot because we are too busy and we're not listening, and we simply go carbs, boop, boop, boop. and we forgot that it's important to listen. How do you feel after you have that meal? Did you feel right after? Did you feel right 2 hours after? And then take lessons from that. So obviously you can do it with your perception, which is the most, I would say, optimum way, but sometimes it's not easy because people are not trained to listen, or we're not used to listen to our body. So that's the reason why CGM, or continuous glucose monitor, on a specific aspect of glucose are great, because it gives you the reading of the way that your body is feeling on that specific parameter. And it's very interesting because you can see, are you sensitive to carbs? Very sensitive, not too sensitive. Do you body respond better when you have a savory breakfast or no breakfast at all? Or what happened when you are fasting? Because one aspect of the French lifestyle we saw interesting is we generally don't snack. The French don't really snack between meals.
Mm-hmm.
And that create micro fasting period that tend to accelerate or train our body to dig into the fat, dig into the reserve, with something that don't happen if you constantly bringing some fresh nutrient, I would say, to our body. So, but it's not suitable for everybody, because we're all different. So
exactly right. Well, and I think that's so funny because, like, you're talking about sort of the old, I'm still of a generation where it was like no snacks until dinner, right? And then things changed, right? Like they changed so differently. Like, oh, now eat whenever you feel hungry. So there's just so many ways in which things have evolved over time. But I agree with you. I think creating those small mini fasts, or even, right, it's called break fast. Like the whole point is you have not eaten for the whole night and now you're breaking the fast. And then we can also look at the French lifestyle and go, oh, but they eat dinner so late. So of course they can then skip breakfast, but again, there's all these different, and in South American countries and Central America, you have a siesta. And in Asian countries, they have like a 2-hour lunch break where not only do they get time to eat, they also get time to actually rest, as opposed to the 30 minutes you're lucky to squeak out here in the United States, right? And so even sort of this notion around how we manage our energy, and what I really love, some of the things that have come out of these last couple of years is, as people work from home, as they have more control over their schedule, as they have more flexibility, people need periods of rest. I mean, when you're just sitting at a computer mindlessly there because you're supposed to be there for 8 hours, of course your productivity is going to slip. And even the recent experiments we've seen around 4-day work weeks and how actually productivity is identical to a 5-day work week, except now you have an extra day to live your life and get other things done. So I'm excited to see how this continues to evolve and change over time. But you're absolutely right. We have to close the feedback loop, trust our guts, consider the source. These are all like my little sayings I have, and you've just brought all of them up to the surface because it's just true. Like, we have to be more conscious. So thanks again, Mathieu. Really great to have you here. Just one more time, where can people find you? And just really appreciate all your knowledge today.
Thank you very much. No, thank you very much for having me. It was great discussion. And as usual, it's a very enjoyable conversation. So I really liked you to have that chat. So where people can find me, the Glico Chef at Instagram. That's the center point. You can navigate then all the content I have and the different resources that we also published. So here you can find me.
Well, thank you. Merci. Gracias.
Merci
and
beaucoup.
Really appreciate you being here today.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for listening to this preview here on YouTube. If you'd like to hear the rest of this interview, along with other useful resources such as show notes, links, and special offers, we'd love to extend an invitation for you to join our Kombucha Camp Plus Bubbles with Benefits member rewards program. By becoming a member, you'll earn bubbles with every Kombucha Camp purchase for free products, and that's not all. We also offer birthday Booch Day rewards, access to members-only sales, high-quality bonus content, including Kombucha Clutch Hangs with me, the Kombucha Mama, and my special guests, a free digital brew journal to track your master brews and experiments, and more. Now here's the best part. It is only $7.99 a month. For $79.99 for the year, you get 2 months free with the annual membership. You can learn more and join our Bubbles with Benefits program at kombuchacamp.com/kombuchacamp+.html. Don't forget, that's camp with a K, because we're cute and clever over here. And don't forget, trust your